Let me tell you a story real quick here. Sitting next to my buddy over here, uh, Galileo, you can see by the dates that he's not a part of this course yet, right? We're talking the 1500s. We'll get to him in, well, quite a while, frankly, in the course. But anyway, so Galileo got himself into some hot water. He confirmed what Copernicus already knew, which was that the Earth is not the center of the universe, right? I mean, yes, some things. There it is, there it is. Oh, I can't find it. Some things revolve around the Earth, but the Earth also revolves around the sun. Why am I telling you this story? Especially the fact that it has nothing to do with what we're talking about right now. Here's why. Because somehow Galileo, looking up into the sky with his telescope and confirming what turns out to be true, got him in pretty hot water. His life was threatened. He eventually said, "I lied, I made it up, my mistake, my bad." What would make a man who knew the truth go back on that truth? Answer? Well, the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church was the only game in town. They were very powerful in the 1600s, especially in a place like Italy. And they didn't like what he had to say. So what we have to figure out in this course is how do we get to the point where the Catholic Church, which was a Christian church, which came about in the Middle East, how does that end up becoming the dominant power in Europe and in Italy? And so powerful, in fact, that it can make a brilliant scientist recant everything he ever discovered and say, "My bad, my bad." Well, today is going to help answer some of those questions. All right, so in our never-ending quest to start the course, we need to, try to shore things up, see where we're coming from, right? Get some context, go back in time. Well, that's what we're doing today, as we did yesterday, and we'll do again tomorrow. We're trying to figure out what Europe was up to. Like we said in the intro, by 1200, when the course technically begins, Europe is deeply Christian, super Christian, maybe one of the most religious societies on the planet at that point. And the Catholic Church was a very powerful institution. More power than just about any king or emperor in all of Europe. So we're trying to answer today the question, how did we get there by 1200? So if we look at a map, I made this myself, forget about the words for now. We don't really have to know that because it's no longer in the scope of the course. But you got Europe there, up there, highly Christian, like we said. You've got the Islamic world right here, as definition would have it, highly Islamic and religious. And you've got the Chinese, the Indians, the Africans, etc. Europe is kind of a mess, and we'll deal with this in the PowerPoint today, because even though Europe is Christian, there's two pieces of it by the end, and by the time this course begins. You've got the Byzantine Empire here, which you probably don't care about, but we do a little bit, and you've got Western Europe, which you're probably more familiar with. Let's take a look at the evolution of all of this, shall we? Surprise! It all goes back to Jesus. So if we're looking at the Christian world, there is no Christianity prior to Jesus, right? Now, I don't know what you know about Jesus. He was a Jew. All 12 disciples are Jews. He would have looked at the Old Testament of the Bible, which is the Jewish Torah, which is the Jewish holy book. Well, Jesus, being a Jew, was born where all the Jews lived, which was basically modern-day Israel. Palestina, the Romans called it. And, we said earlier, yesterday, I suppose, that things were not particularly kosher, shall we say, between the Jews and the Romans. So this whole thing here is the Roman Empire, right, at its height. And I know we don't really have any background, but we got to start somewhere. This whole thing is the Roman Empire. And right here in the frontier, right here, is modern-day Israel, the homeland, the birthplace, if you will, of Judaism. So Jesus would have been down here on the frontier. The Romans, we said, right, polytheistic for the most part, they found the Jews to be a little annoying. The Jews refused to accept the fact that the Roman emperor was a god. The Jews refused to worship all the other gods that the Romans would have worshipped. The Jews just seemed like they were arrogant, always doing their own little thing. Got the Romans' panties in a bunch. And so, there was a lot of tension. We said that the Jews slaughtered Jews. The Jews had several rebellious wars where they fought back. As the accounts go, there was blood ankle deep in the streets of Jerusalem and elsewhere down here, as the Romans and the Jews sort of slogged it out. So the Jews are always a thorn in the side of the Romans. They were always very nervous that the Jews were going to try to rise up and break away. Well, into that steps Jesus, right? And, Jesus wasn't just any Jew. He was a guy that claimed to be the Messiah. Now, most Jews don't believe that. Most Jews are like, wait, we know there's a Messiah coming, but I don't think it's you. Jesus says, no, but it is. Well, I guess you can make your mind up for yourself. But bottom line is, a lot of Jews were nervous about Jesus. He seemed like a faker. He seemed like a poser. The Romans, on the other hand, were nervous because here's this dude who some Jews do think is the actual Messiah and would do anything for this guy. This guy walks around, he attracts crowds of people who all think he's the bee's knees, the cat's meow. So anyway, the Romans are nervous of any Jew who's able to lead people. And so Jesus was kind of in a nasty spot. The Jews were nervous about him for claiming to be something he wasn't. The Romans were nervous about him because they were afraid that he wanted to take over or at least break the Jews away from Rome, which he wasn't trying to do. And so he kind of put himself in a scary little spot, right? So we have this Jewish faith, which now is spawning a Christian faith. We know how the story ends. The Romans eventually crucify him, a pretty common way to kill political prisoners in the Roman Empire. And we, of course, know that in Christian doctrine, Jesus, after 3 days, comes back to life, goes to heaven, and it kind of is the beginning of Christianity. Like, wow, that dude actually came back. He must have been the Messiah. Well, that's not really the point of this PowerPoint. The point is, so then what? It's an interesting question, right? I mean, it's a pretty impressive trick to come back to life if Jesus did that. But then what? Well, what's interesting is Christianity is a mess after that. It's small. I mean, remember, the Romans persecuted the Christians. The Romans tried to stamp out, Jesus and his followers. In fact, they did stamp out Jesus. Christianity doesn't have any organization. It's illegal in a Roman Empire that doesn't want it to happen. So the question is, what is going on in Christianity? Well, it does slowly spread. Now, the beautiful thing is, and we never talked about Rome. I know. But Rome's known for its amazing network of roads. These guys were like master road builders. And roads went all throughout the empire. Plus, they had this really convenient Mediterranean Sea right in the center of their empire, which is great for ship travel, etc. And so word of Jesus begins to spread, right? To Egypt, to Turkey, to Greece, Italy, of course, and all throughout the Roman Empire. Word of Jesus and his teachings begin to spread. And so Christianity, it takes a while, it takes a few hundred years, but it does become a pretty popular faith in the Roman Empire. Why? Well, if you are a Christian, I guess you feel like, well, because it's the truth. We can't look at it that way. We've got to look at it as, okay, so what makes this religion attractive to people? We'll ask the same question about Buddhism later on or Islam tomorrow. What was Christianity's appeal? Well, there are many appeals, but not the least of which is, you never die! And that really comes in handy, right? I mean, who wants to die? What a bummer death is, right? So, just like the Jews beforehand, there was an afterlife. Makes sense. They're going to buy into a lot of the Jewish doctrine, right? There's an afterlife. You get to go and be with God. You never have to die. Speaking of God, only one God. People were finding that more and more attractive. It was different. It was cool. The thought of one master God that could control everything maybe is a little bit simpler than having a myriad of gazillions of gods. But I think what really was attractive about Christianity was it appealed to the losers. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean it appealed to the people who were losing in Roman society. The poor people, the weak, the women, the people who were normally marginalized by the Roman Empire. They found a home here. They found a religion that really spoke to them and celebrated them. I mean, you've got the Roman Empire, which I know we never talked about, my disclaimer, a pretty darn rich place full of rich people, but at the same time, full of slaves. And I don't mean African slaves. That's where your mind probably goes as Americans. I'm talking about people within Roman society were enslaved and had other Roman masters. And what was beautiful about Christianity is it attacked all of that. For every rich Roman guy running around with his stacks of coins and his bling, you've got a biblical passage that comes, from Jesus or from some of his followers saying things like, "For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evils." I mean, in a Roman Empire that celebrates money and rich people, this gives the poor people something to be like, "Ha ha! Yeah, see, rich dude, I told you were a jerk." How about this one? "How difficult will it be for those who have wealth to enter the kingdom of God?" Meaning, man, it is hard to be a rich guy and get into heaven. Rich is bad for your soul. Sure, rich is good here, but not in the afterlife. So clearly, this appeals to the poor. You cannot serve God and money. You must choose. And for these rich people, it's clear who they have chosen. They've chosen money. The poor people can't choose money. Hence, the poor folks have a real good shot at heaven. Rich dudes suck. Okay, maybe I made that part up. I don't think that was in the Bible. But the basic premise is in the Bible. So, yeah, as a religion that appeals to the downtrodden, to the losers, the weak, the poor, there's a lot of those people. I mean, most Roman society, it turns out, were poor, weak. Half of them were women. I did the math myself on that. So you can see why Christianity spreads pretty easily. Now, the problem is, what is Christianity? I mean, sure, they had this whole Jesus thing and they had the Jewish traditions of the past to build off of, but what exactly is it? And what it's interesting is for the first 300 years after Jesus is crucified, everyone's doing their own thing. They're all making it up as they go along, trying to feel out, okay, well, what does God want? What would Jesus have wanted? And churches are all over the place with this. They're very diverse. For example, some churches in the Roman Empire let their women be priests and run ceremonies and rituals. A lot of other churches said, "That's ridiculous. Women can't be priests. What are you, nuts?" For instance, some people said that Jesus was married. There were writings that talked about his wife, etc. Other folks are like, "That's not true. He was not married. Come on, bachelor all the way, baby." One of the biggest arguments was what actually happened when Jesus was crucified. Some people said, "Well, no, dude. Like after 3 days, the stone was rolled away from the tomb. They look inside. No, Jesus. Why? Because his body, shazam, came back to life. Said, 'Hey, everybody, I'll be back,' and ascended to heaven." A lot of other Christians said, "Well, okay, hold on, dude. That doesn't happen. Like once you're dead, you're dead." But we do believe that his soul rose up, and that's what people saw, like his ghost, his soul, and that's what went to heaven. I have to point out, this is a pretty big difference, right? Whether it's his ghost that comes up or his actual resurrected human body comes up, kind of a big deal. And depending on what church you went to, you get a different story because there was nothing that actually spelled out what Christianity is. "Mr. Gerstetter, Mr. Gerstetter." Yes. "Well, they could just look at the Bible." There was no Bible. This is a time prior to the Bible. And it's hard to imagine, right? A Christianity existing without a Bible, but that's exactly the situation we have. I mean, think for yourself right now. You might decide, "Hey man, I'm gonna go start my own religion called Bobism, because my name's Bob, and I'm gonna do my teachings and get people to follow me, and it'll be really cool." Yeah, man. Yeah, how would that go, Bob? Especially Bob, after about a week of you doing your teachings and then someone slit your throat and you're dead. How exactly, 3, 4 years from now, let alone 200 years from now, will Bobism be doing, right? Well, that's exactly where we're at with Christianity here. Sometimes some churches said the Sabbath should be like the Jews, sundown Friday through Saturday. And of course, we know other Christians are like, "No, Sunday." I mean, they're just all over the place. Well, that's about to change. And this is a big deal. It took 300 years, but eventually the Roman Empire turns Christian, which I know seems impossible, right? They hated Christianity. They were feeding Christians to the lions in the Colosseum. But eventually they saw some advantages, like when you're an unpopular Roman emperor, and you have a lot of people who maybe want to break away. Things aren't going so well. Wouldn't it be great if everyone's on the same page? You could become popular. You could appeal to the angry, to the disgruntled, to the poor people by saying, hey, I'm a Christian too. I mean, come on, our political leaders do it all the time in the United States. Presidents, congressmen, senators, some of whom are very religious, many of whom probably don't care, but pretend pretty darn hard to be religious because they know that their constituents want them to be. Same thing happens here. Christianity eventually becomes named the official religion of the empire. Everyone is not just encouraged, but by law, everyone has to become Christian down the road. So Christianity wins. Rome becomes a Christian empire. But that's a problem, because what does that even mean? What is Christianity? Remember, everyone's all over the place. And so once Christianity becomes the official religion, some changes have to be made. Now that the Roman Empire is buying in, now that they are on Team Jesus, hook, line, and sinker, we need to make sure we define what Christianity is. And so the government gets a bunch of important church people together. They sit down and they say, all right, what is this Christianity thing for sure? We can't be wishy-washy. Darn it, the Sabbath is going to be Sunday. Everyone else, no, not Saturday, not Friday night, Sunday. And what about Jesus? Was he married or not? Survey says, not married. Bam, that's the truth. So they're putting together, and I think this was necessary. You can't have everybody on different pages if you're trying to make this your official religion. A hierarchy is created. Someone has to make the final call. Is Jesus married or not? Is it a sin to fill in the dot? Fill in the dot, fill in the blank, don't fill in dots. So a pope is accepted, the leader of the Christian world. Bishops, priests, a whole hierarchy, a whole bureaucracy, like a government bureaucracy of church leaders are chosen and accepted. What we're doing here is we are creating the Catholic Church. And here's a fun fact for you. The word Catholic, all it means is universal. And what does the word universal mean? Well, uni means one, as in there is only one universe, though debated by physicists. All we're doing is creating the one Christian church. That's all Catholic means. The one, the accepted, the only Christian church. That was the goal here. Which is why you have to have a pope. It's why you have to have church officials who see over this stuff. So the pope, still not the emperor of the Roman Empire, but the leader of the Catholic Church, has his seat in Rome. You've got archbishops that are scattered throughout the entire empire. In fact, if you look at this map of Rome, each one of these little provinces of Rome would have its own archbishop seeing over it. And then that would be divided up into smaller bishoprics, as it was called, where bishops would be in charge of all church matters there. So bishops like that dude, I think his name is Henry. I made that up. And of course, at a local level, the church becomes the center of religious life. And you know that church is on the right page. The church isn't saying lies because you've appointed that priest in that church to rule, I shouldn't say to rule, but to run things and to teach the people of his parish. Parish is the local region where the Catholic Church is located, to be on the same page. So, a very centralized way of doing things, a very rigid, a very unifying way. And it was by design. We need to get everybody on the same page, which means you've got to have a book. You got to have a user's manual. You got to have a Bible. So what's going to be in the Bible? Remember, Jesus doesn't sit down one day on a rock and just start scribbling away right in the Bible. What is in the Bible? Well, it's a collection of letters from his disciples, a collection of almost like diary entries from some of his disciples who saw things and wrote about it. There's also books that were written hundreds of years after Jesus from respected authorities on the subject. And so we've got to decide what this Bible should be. Some letters said that Jesus was married, as we said. Some letters say that his soul rises up. Someone's got to make a decision. So We burn those letters. We ban those letters. Other letters are incorporated into the official Bible, making it the official version of what happened. Hence, the Bible is created. So the Roman Empire's had quite a metamorphosis here, going from rich people are awesome, yeah, who cares about the slaves, into adopting Christianity and then refining Christianity into one singular version. There is a downside to this, of course. It's a very important step for the Roman Empire. It's very unifying. It brings Christians together. It gets everybody together on the same page, same rituals, same whatever. However, what do you do about the grumpy people? And there's always going to be grumpy people when an authority tries to tell someone what to do, especially, come on, when it comes to religion, right? So what do you do about that diehard who's like, I'm telling ya, it was Jesus's ghost. It was not his body. Or what do you do when someone's like, I don't care what they say, I'm going to celebrate the Sabbath on Saturday? Well, if you let that go, it's going to spread. Next thing you know, you'll lose track of what Christianity is all over again. And so the Catholic Church and the Roman government would punish heresy. Heresy means non-official beliefs, beliefs that are not officially sanctioned by the Catholic Church. And so when you've got people all around the empire saying things that don't quite match up, there's going to be, no pun intended, hell to pay, right? Now, look, this might seem draconian. This might seem pretty harsh, but that's kind of how this game is played. If you're going to have a religion, you kind of need people on the same page. And I don't care what the religion is. You're going to see Islam do this, to a lesser extent Hinduism, but you're going to see just about every religion, Judaism, etc., do this. There are going to be church authorities, religious authorities who tell everyone else how to believe. That's just how it works. And Christianity is no different. And with the Roman Catholic Church being the only game in town, sanctioned by the government, they were pretty darn effective in all of that. So we come back full circle then to Galileo. Now it's the Roman Empire is long gone, but hundreds of years later, Galileo is going to say, hey, I know the church says that the earth is the center of the universe, but I don't think so. Pope says, I'll have you killed. Galileo says, whoops. Now, last but not least, we see another thing happen with all religions, and that is sooner or later, because it's an institution of people, there's going to be division, disagreements, division, etc. The Roman Empire is going to fall, famously in 476, so about 100 years after they officially go with Christianity. Why do they fall? I wish we could talk about it more. We don't cover that anymore. But long story short, it was a combination of bad rulers and plagues of disease and barbarians. Barbarians, kind of chased in by Attila the Hun, a bunch of these Gothic peoples, Visigoths, Ostrogoths, whatever. They came and they sacked cities and wreaked all sorts of havoc. The point is, when this happens, the western part of Rome couldn't hold up, and it just fell apart. Roman authority eventually went away. No more Roman emperor in the West. No more Roman officials. No more Romans taking care of the aqueducts and all that kind of good stuff. But if you'll notice, those barbarians don't do so well in the eastern part of the empire. You don't see any arrows here, do you? So even though the Western Roman Empire falls in 476, the Eastern Empire stays for another 1,000 years, believe it or not. And so for our purposes, we have two situations. Where Western Rome once was, it no more exists, but the Catholic Church does. And that's the key, right? It's the only leftover authority from all of those years of Roman rule. So maybe the Roman emperor is gone, but the Pope's still around. Maybe Roman officials are gone from the government, but bishops, priests are still around. Maybe Roman government buildings are in disrepair because no one's working on them, but the churches, the cathedrals still remain. And so in Western Europe, the Catholic Church stays on as the only real, intact institution. When babies are born, they have a baptism, and the Roman Catholic Church writes it down. When grandpa dies, there's a funeral, and the church writes it down. Think about it. The church is the only institution that can even do a census. It knows who's born, who dies. Everyone comes to church on Sunday so they can get a message out to everybody, even though the government is non-existent. So the Catholic Church is the only game in town in Western Europe. Now, in the Eastern Roman Empire, for the next 1,000 years, they have their own separate Christian church. It won't be long before they break away from the Roman Catholic Church. They become known as the Byzantine Empire. Basically, Rome lives on. There are some differences. They're very similar, but there are differences. It eventually becomes the Greek Orthodox Church today or the Russian Orthodox Church. Point is, Christianity divides up. And so it brings us then back to our map. What's going on in Europe? Well, by the time this course begins, you've got a Western Europe that is pretty weak because there's no real government there running things. But the Catholic Church is the only thing holding it together. The Byzantine Empire, on the other hand, isn't doing so hot either, let's be honest, but has a government and is still intact, and it's got their own version of Christianity holding things together. As you can see, Islam has since been born and is really pushing in, squeezing the Christian world. But we'll see how that goes. Well, anyway, I just wanted to use Christianity as a brief little way of telling the story, explaining how the Byzantines got here, why Western Europe's got its issues. We'll, of course, deal a lot with this in 1200 when we get there, but this is just your background part of the show. All right, everybody. Well, it was a pleasure. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. We'll be back tomorrow, I guess, or the day after that. I'm not sure if it's a weekend. I don't really pay attention to that sort of stuff. School, history, all the time. That's who I am. Anyway, next time I see you, it is on to the Islamic world. See ya.